ultimate nuclear annihilation. It's an unavoidable truth in the world. Unless it isn't. You see, it isn't uncommon for the world to almost end in nuclear Armageddon, as seen in the last century. The Cold War was a great time if you're a fan of Fallout, but if you weren't, I'm truly sorry for you. This was a time of anxiety for Americans, Soviets, and everybody else in the world. But why did it happen, and was it really that bad? Well, first we need some contextualization. Because, I mean, come on, who doesn't like some contextualization? After World War II, the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union were good chums. They just defeated the Nazis and H-bombed the Japanese, and everything was going great. The US had everything under control, as they had a monopoly under the hydrogen bomb, so they knew no one would go against them. In fact, everything was going so well that the Allies were like, we're going to give control of Eastern Europe to Stalin, but as long as he makes them have free and fair elections, because the Soviet Union is totally trustworthy, right? Stalin then proceeded to make all of Eastern Europe communists and added them to the Soviet Union. In fact, he kept on going on more and more escapades for power, until Truman was like, hey man, chill. In the Truman Doctrine, which is usually considered to be the start of the Cold War. In addition to these factors, another contributing cause was the battle of ideologies. You see, America was capitalist, and if there's one thing that communists don't like, it's capitalists. And if there's one thing that capitalists don't like, it's communists. This of course led to people believing the other side was evil, and couldn't be possibly introduced into their country at any cost, and all that sort of junk. Are we talking about the Cold War? The Cold War was so cold-hearted, it sends it so down to my spine. Such an immense so that I need to put on a coat, because I mean the Cold War was pretty cold. You see, the Cold War wasn't like most wars, because it wasn't just one big war, but rather a series of proxy wars fought in different countries, with probably the most notable being the Korean and Vietnam Wars. It was also based on mutually assured destruction, so if nuclear war ever did happen, then both sides would suffer immensely, making it so that it would be highly unlikely for somebody to initiate the first strike. Thankfully, none of these proxy wars led to a missile crisis. Until one did. The United States didn't like communism. And I mean, they really didn't like communism. So when Cuba, their next door neighbor that's 90 miles away, had a socialist revolution, let me just say that the United States was pretty livid.
And I want it clearly understood that this government will not hesitate in meeting its primary obligations, which are to the security of our nation.
So what did the United States try to do? They tried to rid communism from Cuba by throwing a coup in an event they sponsored called the Bay of Pigs invasion. The invasion failed miserably, and Cuba was not happy. This led to Fidel Castro saying, hey, what's up the Soviet Union? So the US doesn't like me, and I'm convinced that they're gonna kill me, so can we have an alliance or something like that? And then the Soviet Union was like, okay, I'm in, but on one condition. On a cool October day of 1962, a US reconnaissance plane was flying over Cuba and noticed something a bit strange. What seemed to be some intermediate-range nuclear missiles were being built, which was just not it. The US asked kindly to the Soviet Union to remove the missiles, but the USSR said nope, so the US started a blockade and made sure no Soviet ships got to Cuba. As you could expect, this escalated tensions, and with new military reconnaissance flights saying that the nukes were basically completed, and a US reconnaissance plane being recently shut down, people thought that war was going to break out. It got so bad that the US put out DEFCON 2 for the first time in history, which was right above total nuclear war, so that's great. This all reached its climax when a submarine headed for Cuba with nuclear weapons was stopped by a US ship. This, on the surface, doesn't sound like a big deal, but look at it from the crew's perspective. The last time they were on the surface, it seemed nuclear war was about to break out, and being stopped by a ship only instilled disbelief in the crew. This prompted the crew to almost launch an underwater nuclear torpedo. That is, if it wasn't for Vasily Arkhipov. You see, to launch a nuclear torpedo, you needed unanimous agreement from the captain and political officer, which there was. But Vasily Arkhipov, who just happened to be on the ship almost arbitrarily, didn't give permission. And because he was a lieutenant and higher ranked than the other officers, he carried veto powers. He believed that the reward did not outweigh the risk, since if they fired the nuke and there was no war, then war would be certainly inevitable. Through his resilient stance and not succumbing to peer pressure, he basically saved us all from nuclear war. This story does have a happy ending though, as a couple of moments before the US was about to launch an invasion into Cuba, the USSR called, and they reached an agreement where the US would not invade Cuba and withdraw their nukes from Turkey, which was very close to the Soviet Union, and in return, the USSR would withdraw their nukes from Cuba. And that was the closest we've ever gotten to nuclear war. Right? Right? Well, there was this other crisis in Europe called the Euro Missile Crisis, which almost wiped out our feeble existence. There, I said it, our existence is feeble. Basically, what the Euro Missile Crisis was that the Soviets installed new SS-20 missiles to replace their old SS-4 and SS-5 missiles, so that they could scare the US from entering into European affairs. However, this had the exact opposite effect, and America, who was just built different, was like, nah, screw you, and put their own missiles in Western Europe, since the Cold War was built on mutual destruction. So now, the current situation was, America could nuke the Soviet Union in 6 minutes, and the Soviets were freaking out, since they knew they had inferior technology. Ronald Reagan, a person who absolutely despised communism, was in office, and things weren't looking too great for them. Needless to say, they were on edge. Throughout the crisis, the USSR was on high alert, and in 1983, it finally happened. In Serpkov 15, a bunker that monitors satellite-based direction systems, it stated that the US had launched 5 interconnected ballistic missiles. However, Lieutenant Stanislav Petrov was on command, and he knew the system in and out, and doubted that this was real. He knew the new satellite system was mistake-prone, and realized any American nuclear attack would come in hundreds of missiles, not just 5. So he disobeyed orders and didn't report it to the high command, narrowly saving us all from nuclear calamity. It was later found out that this was caused by the satellite misinterpreting a rare alignment of sunlight on high-altitude clouds. And this was the final time the world almost ended. Right? Right? Well, there was this other time in the Euro Missile Crisis where NATO was performing an exercise called Able Archer 83 that would simulate a series of conflict escalations, culminating in the US launching a coordinated nuclear attack. However, here's the thing. They wanted to make it as realistic as possible, so they didn't preface this with saying that this was only an exercise. The workers there didn't know that this was an exercise, nor did the Soviets, who were spying on them. In the Soviets' minds, it seemed like they were launching an attack on them, and they almost retaliated by launching nukes of their own, until they realized this was only an exercise. And this was the final time the world almost ended. Right? Right? Well, there was this time, in 1979, when the US was starting to rely on computers to detect possible nuclear attacks. Even though these systems proved to be very effective, they had a few disadvantages, those being the fact that they were prone to false alarms and glitches. And wouldn't you know, on November 9th, 1979, the computer said that the Soviets had launched a barrage of missiles on America, so the US scrambled to launch interceptor planes and a retaliatory nuclear attack. However, after closer inspection and a look at satellite imagery, it turned out that the event, now called the NORAD computer glitch, was just a glitch, and nuclear war was narrowly avoided. And it turned out that the cause of this was a technician who accidentally ran a training program simulating a Soviet attack on the US. So a technician almost caused the literal annihilation of everyone on Earth. And this was the final time the world almost ended. Right? Well, I mean, we can't forget the times when nations accidentally dropped weapons of mass destruction. Like the one time the USA accidentally dropped a couple of hydrogen bombs into Soviet territory, and almost started total nuclear war. So, all in all, the world has a pretty good track record of not killing everybody. Let this be a warning that war is not fun, and should never be sought after. Like a wise man named Albert Einstein once said, "I know not what weapons will be fought in World War III, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." So, anyways, I gotta go prepare my sticks and stones for World War IV. Oh, and thank God I brought my code. I'll be ready for nuclear winter. So, as always, guys, thanks for watching, and as always, stay thinking. Goodbye.